My daughter-in-law had an accident and fell into a coma. During one of my visits to the hospital, my grandson came up to me and whispered, "Grandma, Mom isn't sick. She's pretending." Confused, I answered him, "What? Don't say that." Then he handed me his phone, and I froze. I'm glad you're here. If you're seeing this, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. I wheeled the old motorcycle out from the front of the bakery, my hands still coated with the smell of flour and yeast. This morning had been busier than usual. Customers were coming in and out without a break. Every day that passed, I felt a small joy seeing the warm loaves arranged on the shelves, hearing the laughter and conversations of the people. But what I wanted most in that moment was to get to the school to pick up Leo, my dear grandson. The boy was always excited, telling me what happened in class, his eyes shining as if he wanted to show me the whole world. Just thinking about his smile made all my exhaustion disappear. I had just put on my helmet, ready to start the engine, when the phone in my pocket vibrated powerfully. An unknown number. I frowned. I hesitated for a second, but ended up putting it to my ear. The voice on the other end was rushed, cold, like a knife interrupting my thoughts. "Are you Mrs. Miller? Your daughter-in-law has just been in a serious car accident. We're rushing her to St. Jude's Medical Center." I felt a ringing in my ears, as if the whole world had suddenly gone silent. The motorcycle wobbled under my hands, almost falling to the ground. I stood motionless, clinging to the handlebars, with the feeling that the blood had stopped flowing in my body. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out all the noises around me. Clara, my daughter-in-law, whom I had always loved like a daughter, in a serious accident. Those words echoed over and over in my head, but I couldn't grasp their true weight. I only knew that, in that instant, I had to go, see her, find out what was happening. I quickly dialed the number for Ethan, my son, but I only heard the unanswered ringing tones. He must already be at the hospital, I told myself, trying to stay calm. But inside me, fear burned like a fire, consuming any attempt to think clearly. I wanted to race to the hospital, but then I remembered Leo. The boy was still at school, waiting for me to pick him up. I couldn't leave him alone. I couldn't let him find out from someone else. I had to be strong. For Leo, for Ethan, for the whole family. With a burning heart, I sped toward the school. The streets of Chicago seemed more crowded than ever. Every car, every horn, was a wall slowing me down. Every second that passed was like a stab wound. I wondered, how is Clara? Is she in pain? Is she conscious? Images of a brutal accident flashed through my mind, and I had to force them away. I could only pray, murmuring the prayers my mother had taught me as a child, pleading for a miracle. When I reached the school gate, I saw Leo waiting, hugging his superhero backpack. His little face lit up when he saw me, his eyes sparkling as if he was about to tell me something funny. But I couldn't wait. I couldn't let him finish. With a hoarse and trembling voice, I told him, "Leo, get on the motorcycle now. Your mom had an accident. We have to go to the hospital." I saw his smile vanish in an instant, like a light switched off. He didn't ask anything, just got on in silence, his small hands clinging tightly to my waist. He didn't say a word the whole way, but I could feel his fear in the pressure of that hug. I wanted to turn around, hug him, tell him everything would be okay, but I didn't even dare to believe it myself. St. Jude's Medical Center appeared before my eyes, cold and suffocating. The white building, the strong smell of disinfectant that filled my nose, made me feel like I couldn't breathe. I led Leo by the hand down the long corridors. My steps hurried but heavy. When we reached the emergency room, I saw Ethan standing there, dazed like a ghost. His hair was a mess. His once pristine white shirt was now wrinkled, the sleeves stained with dark blood. I knew it was Clara's blood, from when he carried his wife to bring her here. Seeing my son like that tore my soul apart. Ethan, my strong son, now looked like a lost child. Upon seeing me, Ethan ran to me, buried his head in my shoulder, and sobbed like never before. "Mom, Clara, the doctor said it's really bad." His voice broke, trembling, as if all his strength had disappeared. I held him, trying to stay strong, but I was shaking too. Leo, seeing his father cry, also burst into tears. His childish, disoriented voice screamed, "Mommy!" The boy clung tightly to Ethan's pants, his big eyes filled with fear, as if terrified of being abandoned in the middle of this storm. I knelt, pulled him to my chest, trying to protect him. But how could I protect him when I was drowning in fear myself? The three of us sat on the cold plastic chairs in the hallway. Time seemed to have stopped. The strong smell of disinfectant, the dry voice from the loudspeakers sounding over and over. Every noise was like a knife piercing my heart. I looked at Ethan. I looked at Leo. And then at the closed door of the emergency room. I wanted to scream, to pound on the door, to do anything to know how Clara was, but I could only sit there, helpless, waiting. Nearly 3 hours passed, as long as a century. Finally, the emergency room door opened. An older man with a serious face came out. He introduced himself as Dr. Evans, the hospital director. His voice was deep and deliberate, as if he weighed every word. The patient suffered a severe traumatic brain injury and has fallen into a deep coma. We did everything we could, but when she wakes up depends on the patient's will. Those words were a blow to the chest. Deep coma. Patient's will. The phrases echoed in my mind, but I couldn't comprehend them. Clara, the woman who was always radiant, full of life, now lay motionless, between life and death. Ethan collapsed. If I hadn't caught him, he would have fallen to the floor. His eyes clouded over, as if his entire world had crumbled. Leo, frightened, huddled in my arms, his small body trembling. I held him tight, trying to hide my own pain, but my tears were already streaming down, silent, impossible to contain. I didn't want Leo to see his grandmother cry, but how could I be strong when my family was breaking apart? A young nurse, with a name tag that read Sarah, approached with a chart. In a soft voice, she said, "The family can see the patient through the glass, but please don't make any noise." I nodded and led Leo and Ethan to the thick glass window. Through it, I saw Clara, motionless among a tangle of wires. Her face was pale, lifeless. Her lips, which always smiled, were now closed, as if she had gone far away, to a place we couldn't reach. Ethan pressed his forehead against the glass and cried out in desperation, "Honey, open your eyes and look at me." His heartbreaking voice echoed, shattering the quiet of the hallway. The nurses rushed to gently calm him, but I knew nothing could ease my son's pain in that moment. I just stood there, holding Leo, feeling every faint beat of his little heart. I wanted to say something, to comfort him, but my throat closed up, unable to utter a single word. That night, I practically had to drag Leo back home. The boy was crying inconsolably. He wanted to stay with his mother, but I couldn't leave him in the suffocating atmosphere of the hospital. I comforted him, promising we would come back the next day, though I myself didn't know what awaited us. Ethan insisted on staying, huddled in a plastic chair in the hallway, his lost gaze fixed on the room's door. I looked at my son, and my heart broke, but I knew I couldn't stay. Leo needed me, the bakery needed me, and this whole family was depending on me to hold it together. In the days that followed that fateful moment, my small house seemed to be covered in a dark, heavy fog. Every morning when I woke up, it felt as if a rock was sitting on my chest, making every breath difficult. I have lived for 62 years. I have witnessed separations and deaths, but I had never felt as powerless as I did now. Clara was still there in the hospital, motionless as a statue, and Ethan, the son I was so proud of for his strength, was now just a shadow, making St. Jude's his second home. Every day I saw Ethan sitting in front of Clara's room, still as a stone figure. His eyes were bloodshot, without their former sparkle. During the day he would just sit there, staring at the door, as if by watching long enough, Clara would open her eyes, walk out, and smile at him like before. But at night, when darkness fell, Ethan sought solace in alcohol. More than once I found him sitting alone on a hospital bench, a bottle in his hand, his gaze as lost as a tormented soul. Once, I arrived earlier than usual and found him passed out in the hallway, next to an empty bottle of whiskey rolling on the floor. A young nurse, perhaps Sarah, approached cautiously and said to me in a low voice, "Ma'am, he shouldn't be drinking so much. It's not good for him." I could only nod, suppressing a sigh, though inside I felt like I was suffocating. I did everything I could to pull Ethan out of that abyss. Every morning I would get up at 3, light up the small kitchen, and prepare the freshly baked bread he loved so much. I would wrap it carefully and take it to the hospital, hoping that the familiar aroma would awaken something in him. But it was always the same. He would barely take a couple of bites before putting it all down, his eyes fixed on the room's door. "I'm not hungry, Mom," he would mutter in a hoarse voice, as if he had no emotion left. I would look at him and feel myself breaking inside. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to tell him that he had to live, to be strong for Leo, for himself, but I could only collect the dishes in silence, taking them back with a heavy heart. The burden of the entire family now rested on my aging shoulders. I was no longer young. Every morning when I got up, I felt every aching joint, every tired muscle, but I couldn't stop. The small bakery was our only source of income, and I had to keep it running. At 3 in the morning, when the whole city was asleep, I was already kneading dough and firing up the oven. The smell of hot bread used to bring me joy, but now it only reminded me of the peaceful days we had lost. During the day, I tended the shop while checking the clock, then rushed to pick up Leo. There were days when there were so many customers that I could barely breathe, but I still had to grit my teeth and smile at each person, even though inside I just wanted to collapse. Leo, my little grandson, also changed completely. He used to be the sunshine of the house, with his radiant smile and his endless stories. But now he had become quiet, reserved. Every afternoon, coming out of school, I would see him sitting silently in a corner of the playground, clutching his superhero backpack tightly, his gaze lost. Once, his teacher took me aside, her voice full of concern. "Mrs. Miller, Leo has been very withdrawn lately. He doesn't play with the others, he just sits by himself. Is there a problem at home?" I could only force a smile and give a vague answer. "He's just a little tired, don't worry." But inside, I knew well that Leo was carrying a wound too big for his little heart. I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay. But how could I promise something I didn't believe myself? Every afternoon, I took Leo to the hospital to visit his mother. It was part of the routine, part of the fragile hope that Clara would wake up. But the scene at the hospital never changed. Ethan was still there, with a scruffy beard, smelling strongly of alcohol. I tried to keep Leo from noticing, but the boy was more sensitive than I thought. He would quietly take the drawings he made in class, press them against the cold glass, and whisper to his mother, "Mom, today I drew the whole family at the beach. There's you, Dad, Grandma, and me. Wake up soon, so we can go for real." His voice would tremble, as if he were trying to hold on to a dream that was falling apart in his hands. I stood beside him, listening to every word, my heart shattered into pieces. Clara was still there, motionless, showing no signs of response. Ethan used to take his son in his arms, and with a broken voice would say, "Your mom can hear you, son. She's going to get better soon." But he would be the one to end up crying, and Leo, seeing him, would also break into tears. I had to hurry to comfort him and get him out of there, even though I was falling apart inside too. The private life of my family, once a source of pride, had now become the subject of neighborhood gossip. One day, while standing in line at the grocery store, Mrs. Gable, an acquaintance of many years, pulled me aside and asked with a curious tone, "I don't see Ethan and his wife together anymore. What happened? And is Clara okay?" I hesitated for a moment, trying to keep my voice calm. "Clara had an accident. She's in the hospital." But Mrs. Gable's prying eyes and the murmurs of those nearby made me want to disappear. I clutched my basket and practically ran out. But the comments followed me, like needles stabbing at my pride. I didn't want my family to be the talk of the town, but I knew that in a small neighborhood like this, nothing could be hidden forever. That night, Ethan came home staggering, reeking of alcohol. He looked at me with red eyes and yelled, "Don't tell anyone about Clara. I don't need their pity." His voice was harsh, but I knew that behind that anger was a pain impossible to put into words. I just nodded silently, holding back a sigh, and let him stumble up to his room. Leo was on the stairs, his childish gaze following his father's wavering silhouette. He said nothing. He just went to his room with his head down, clutching his superhero pillow tightly. Seeing him, I wanted to run and hug him, but I knew nothing could ease his pain in that moment. That night I was left alone in the cold kitchen, facing a mountain of bills that kept growing. The expenses from Clara's hospital stay, Leo's school, the bakery's upkeep. Every number was like a cut to my soul. I had worked my whole life, with sweat and tears, to build a stable life for my family, and now everything seemed to be falling apart. That afternoon, the Chicago sun was still relentless. I had just cleaned the bakery. I locked the door, got Leo into the car, and prepared for our daily visit to the hospital. The boy was in the back seat, quiet, clutching his superhero backpack as if it were the last comfort he had left. I wanted to say something to break the silence, but my throat closed up. I could only sigh and press the accelerator. When we arrived at St. Jude's, the familiar, painful scene appeared before my eyes. The hallway was still cold. The smell of disinfectant burned my nose, and the announcements from the speaker sounded dry, one after another. Ethan was sitting in the plastic chairs, his head drooping, dozing from sheer exhaustion. At his feet, an empty beer can rolled, glinting under the fluorescent light. Seeing my son like this made my heart sink. Ethan was once a man full of life, always laughing and talking loudly, but now he was just a shadow, consumed by grief and alcohol. I motioned for Leo to be quiet. I didn't want to wake his father. The boy nodded, his round eyes full of worry, and followed me slowly. We both approached the thick glass of the room. Clara was there, still, as if lost in a deep sleep. The steady beeping of the machine sounded on, a cruel reminder that she was still alive, but hanging by a thread. Her face was pale, without a trace of life, her lips closed as if holding a secret. I looked at her with a shattered heart. How many times had I stood in this very spot, hoping for a miracle, hoping she would open her eyes, smile, and say it had all just been a nightmare. But it was always the same, the silence, and each time my heart broke a little more. I was about to take Leo's hand and lead him away, to escape that suffocating atmosphere, when he suddenly tugged on my clothes, stood on his tiptoes, leaned close to my ear, and whispered, quietly, but with a force that pierced my soul, "Grandma, I don't think Mom is sick. She's pretending." I felt a sharp blow, as if someone had slapped me. I turned, looked directly into Leo's clear eyes, and tried to speak calmly, though everything inside me was trembling. "Leo, don't talk nonsense. Your mom is very sick, you know that." But the boy didn't argue as he usually would. He lowered his head, his hands shaking, as he turned on the old cell phone Ethan had given him for cartoons. "Look at this, Grandma," he said in a voice so low I had to strain to hear him. The screen flickered on and showed the image of Clara's room. There was no one else in the video, just her lying in the bed, surrounded by wires and tubes. But then the unthinkable happened. Clara slowly opened her eyes, looked around as if checking that no one was there, and then casually scratched her cheek. A moment later, she even sat up a little, took the glass of water from the table, took a sip, and lay back down, closing her eyes to become motionless again, as if nothing had happened. I stared at the screen, my head spinning, as if the whole world had turned upside down. That wasn't a woman in a coma. That was a fraud. I collapsed into the chair, my hands weak, almost dropping the phone. Leo was beside me, his voice trembling, as if he was scared by what he himself had discovered. "I've seen it a few times, Grandma. Whenever no one is here, Mom opens her eyes and looks around. But when you or Dad are here, she stays still. I don't know what she's doing, so I recorded it in secret for you to see." Hearing him, a chill ran down my spine. Leo's innocent whisper, that short video, were like a lightning bolt that shattered the fog inside me. Clara, my daughter-in-law whom I had always loved like a daughter, was faking? But why? For what purpose? I hurriedly put the phone in my purse, trying to keep my voice as stern as possible. "Leo, you absolutely cannot tell your dad about this. Do you understand?" The boy nodded, his eyes shining with fear and confusion. I knew he didn't fully understand what was happening, but he sensed the gravity of it. I hugged him, trying to hide the storm raging inside me. But just then, Ethan stirred and woke up. He rubbed his eyes, looking at us with a hoarse voice. "What are you two talking about?" I jumped, shook my head, and changed the subject. "Nothing. I was just reminding Leo to do his homework at home." Ethan nodded, then pulled his son close and whispered, "Don't worry, Mom will wake up soon." Leo lowered his head, avoiding his father's gaze. Seeing him like that, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. He was too young to carry this weight, to keep a secret from his own father. On the way home, I rode the motorcycle as if I were floating, without feeling my feet touch the ground. My mind was a chaotic mess. The images from the video replayed over and over, like a horror movie on a loop. Leo's whisper, his terrified look, and Clara's motionless face. They were all pieces that didn't fit. I wondered, am I misinterpreting this? Is it just an involuntary moment, a bodily reaction? But deep down, I knew what I saw was no accident. Clara was hiding something, and that filled me with fear. Not fear for her, but for Ethan, for Leo, for my entire family. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, before the first light of day had seeped through the crack in the door. I arrived at St. Jude's earlier than usual, when the hallways were still empty and only a few on-duty staff members passed by in silence. Ethan hadn't arrived yet. Perhaps he had gone home to clean up after a long night by his wife's side. I stood in the corner of the hallway, looking through the window into Clara's room. She was still there, motionless, her face as pale as wax. But now, every time I looked at her, I no longer saw the fragility of someone fighting between life and death. Instead, I only saw a veil of mystery, hiding something I couldn't yet decipher. Sarah, the young nurse assigned exclusively to Clara's care, was in the room. She was cleaning my daughter-in-law's body with gentle but somewhat mechanical movements. I hid around the corner of the hallway, watching her every gesture. Sarah worked, but her eyes constantly darted outside, as if afraid of being discovered. From time to time she would murmur something, so low I couldn't understand, but enough to make me uneasy. Something wasn't right. I knew it for sure. My heart was a tangle of anger and fear, but I told myself I had to stay calm. If I wanted to uncover the truth, I couldn't let my emotions take over. When Sarah came out of the room, carrying the chart, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. She was bent over, writing, not noticing my presence. I tried to keep my voice serene, even though my heart was pounding against my chest. "Good morning, Sarah. Tell me, in the moments you're caring for Clara, have you ever noticed anything out of the ordinary? For example, has she ever woken up in secret when no one is around?" I pronounced each word carefully, watching her reaction closely. Sarah jumped as if I had thrown a bomb right at her chest. Her eyes widened in terror, and the pen she was holding fell to the floor with a sharp clatter. That sound echoed in the silent hallway, confirming that I had struck her deepest fear. "Ma'am, what are you saying?" I don't understand," Sarah stammered, avoiding my gaze, unable to meet it. She took a step back, clutching the clipboard as if trying to hold on to it. I moved closer, my voice firm, without a trace of gentleness. "That reaction means it's true, doesn't it?" I looked her straight in the eye, searching for a crack in her panic. Sarah's face was pale, her lips trembling as if she were about to cry. She sank into the chair, speaking in a thin voice, almost a whisper. I was just following Dr. Evans' orders. He asked me to keep the secret. Please, I'm just an employee, don't involve me in this." That partial confession hit me like a lightning bolt. I stood motionless, feeling as if the floor was opening up beneath my feet. It was true. Clara was not only faking a coma, but Dr. Evans, the hospital director, was also involved. I tried to keep my voice calm, though I was boiling with rage inside. "What exactly did he ask you to do? Tell me clearly." I took another step forward, giving her no room to escape. Sarah shook her head forcefully, wringing her hands, her words choppy. "He just ordered me to take good care of Mrs. Miller and not to tell anyone she had already woken up. I have nothing to do with the rest. I beg you, don't blame me." She looked up, her eyes red, as if pleading for forgiveness. But I couldn't give in. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed the truth. I needed to protect my son and my grandson from whatever was happening. At that moment, another nurse walked down the hallway, giving us a curious look. Sarah shot up, picked up her pen, and pretended to resume her notes as if nothing had happened. I turned around in silence, my heart pounding like a drum. Every step out of the hallway felt heavy, as if I were carrying a boulder. What Sarah had admitted not only confirmed my suspicions but revealed something worse. This wasn't just Clara's charade, it was a deceit backed by someone in power, like Dr. Evans. What were they plotting? How could they be so cruel as to deceive an entire family, letting Ethan and Leo sink into despair? When Ethan arrived at the hospital, I tried to remain calm, as if nothing had happened. He asked me with a tired voice, "Mom, how's Clara? Any news?" I just shook my head and replied in a low voice, "She's the same, son. The doctor says there's no progress." But inside, the fire was consuming me. I wanted to tell Ethan everything, show him Leo's video, tell him his wife wasn't in a coma. But when I saw his bloodshot eyes, his exhausted face, I couldn't. Ethan had already lost so much, and I feared this truth would be the final blow that destroyed him completely. That night, I tossed and turned in my old bed. The dim moonlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating the ceiling, but it couldn't dispel the darkness that shrouded my mind. I clutched the blanket tightly, trying to force myself to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, sharp questions pierced my heart. Why did Clara do this? What role did Dr. Evans play in all of this? And the most terrible question of all, were all those years I loved and trusted my daughter-in-law just a lie? I felt betrayed, not just by Clara, but by my own naivety. I realized I couldn't solve this alone. I needed help. The next morning I got up early and took Leo to school as usual. The boy was still silent, hugging his Spider-Man backpack, his gaze lost as if trapped in a world he didn't understand. I stroked his head and tried to smile. "Try hard in school today. I'll pick you up early." Leo nodded, but I knew he didn't believe my words of comfort. Seeing his small back disappear behind the school gate, I felt my heart tighten. I had to find out the truth, not just for myself, but for Leo, so he wouldn't have to live in this darkness any longer. I drove straight to the office of Mr. Davies, a private detective who had been a friend of my late husband. He was a former police officer, whom my husband always respected for his dedication and sharp mind. Davies's office was in a neglected corner, with a worn wooden sign. When I entered, I saw him sitting behind a scarred desk, his piercing eyes looking at me over silver-framed glasses. "Mrs. Miller, it's been a long time. What's wrong? You seem so tense," he asked in a deep but attentive voice. I took a deep breath and told him everything, from Leo's innocent whisper and the unexpected video to the confrontation with the nurse, Sarah. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking as I showed him the video on my phone. Davies watched it over and over, frowning, his fingers tapping gently on the table as he always did. "This is not a small matter, Mrs. Miller," he said in a low voice. "If what you say is true, there's a conspiracy underway. I'll help you, but you must keep this a secret, especially from your son." I nodded, feeling relieved to share the burden, but also heavier as the truth began to come to light. Davies promised to start watching the hospital immediately, and I left his office with a fragile spark of hope mixed with fear. That evening, I took Leo back to the hospital. The air was as suffocating as ever. The smell of disinfectant hit me, and the constant sounds of machines came from Clara's room. Ethan was already there, sitting by his wife's bed, holding her hand tightly, while silent tears rolled down his cheeks. Seeing him like that, pain shot through me. Ethan, my strong son, the pride of my life, now seemed like an empty man. I wanted to hug him, to tell him the whole truth, but every time I met his bloodshot eyes, I didn't dare. How could I tell him that the woman he loved was possibly deceiving him? How could I break his heart even more? I made an excuse to go into the hallway for some water, leaving Leo with his father. As I passed a corner near the nurse's station, I caught a glimpse of Sarah talking to a security guard. She slipped a thin folder into his hand, her gaze nervous, as if afraid of being discovered. I held my breath and slowed my pace to listen better. "Give this to him, quickly," Sarah murmured in a trembling voice. The guard nodded, slipped the folder into his jacket pocket, and walked briskly toward Dr. Evans's office. When Sarah turned back, her eyes met mine. She jumped, quickly lowered her head, pretending not to see me, and hurried away. I moved forward, intending to call out to her, but the guard was already looking at me, his eyes full of suspicion. I stopped, feeling as if an invisible hand was squeezing my throat. A few days later, Davies asked me to meet him at a small diner tucked away in a deserted alley. When I arrived, he was already sitting in a secluded corner with a stack of photos in front of him. "Sit down," he said, his voice deep but tense. He pushed the photos toward me, and as I looked at them, I felt my entire body freeze. They were photos taken secretly, showing Clara, in a patient gown with a white coat over it, sneaking out of her room in the middle of the night. She walked with soft but deliberate steps, showing no signs of being in a coma. Clara went straight to Dr. Evans's office. The door shut abruptly behind her. The light inside was still on, even though it was past midnight. I picked up the photos with trembling hands, feeling the blood drain from my face. Is this real?" I said, my voice hoarse. I couldn't hear anything, but it's clear something strange is going on. I've watched her for several nights, and this isn't the only time she's done it. I'm going to keep investigating, but you need to be prepared. This could be bigger than we think." I nodded, though my mind was blank. Sarah's words echoed in my ears. I'm just following Evan's orders. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a terrifying picture I didn't want to believe. When I got home, I sat in the dark kitchen, the dim light falling on my trembling hands. Leo was already asleep, but I knew he was still carrying the fear he felt toward his mother. Ethan was at the hospital, caring for a wife who was possibly deceiving him. I took out my phone, rewatched Leo's video, and thought about Davies's photos. Every detail was like a stab wound, but I knew I couldn't stop. I decided that, in addition to trusting Davies, I had to find more evidence myself. I couldn't let my family continue to live in a lie. I had to protect Ethan, protect Leo, even if the price was my own shattered heart. That morning I woke up before dawn. I couldn't sleep, not from tiredness, but because doubt and pain had been eating at me all night. I looked at the clock. It was barely 4. Ethan, my son, was probably still fast asleep after a night of drinking. It was my chance to do what I had put off for too long. I went up the stairs silently, barefoot so as not to make a sound. The house was eerily quiet. Only the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. I stood in front of the door to Ethan and Clara's room. I gripped the handle tightly, feeling my heart pound furiously in my chest. I knew I shouldn't be doing this, that I shouldn't be snooping in my son and daughter-in-law's room, but I had no other choice. If Clara was truly betraying us, I needed proof, something to protect my family. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The room was still filled with Clara's sweet, pungent perfume, a fragrance that once seemed tender and familiar. On the dresser, a red lipstick was left open, as if she had just left a few minutes ago. These small details pierced my soul. I remembered when Clara first got married, how she would carefully comb her hair, how she would smile trying on a new dress. Had it all been a lie? I shook my head, pushing those memories away, and began to search. I opened each drawer, careful not to disturb anything. Every little noise, even the slight rustle of fabric, made me jump, afraid that Ethan would wake up and find me. I checked the dresser, the bookshelves, even under the bed, but I found nothing but the usual items. Finally, I opened the old wardrobe where Clara used to keep her things. In the bottom drawer, hidden under several layers of silk scarves, I found a bundle of blue folders tied with a rubber band. My hands trembled as I opened it, as if I were about to touch a dreadful secret. Inside were 2 life insurance policies, the documents carefully printed, with Clara's clear signature at the bottom of each page. The first was a health insurance policy, with a clause that would pay a huge sum if the patient required prolonged treatment or fell into a coma. The amount stunned me, enough to buy a large house. The second policy was even more terrifying, a term life insurance policy with a payout several times higher, enough to completely change a life. I read them over and over, trying to understand why Clara, a woman with no stable job, had signed such large contracts. She used to ask Ethan for money for shopping, and sometimes she even asked me, with some embarrassment, to cover basic expenses. So where did the money to pay for these policies come from? And why did she need them? I took out my phone and photographed every page, careful not to wrinkle the paper. Every time I pressed the button, I felt like I was betraying my own family, but I knew I had no other choice. I put the folders back where I found them, closed the drawer, and left the room. But as soon as I opened the door, I ran into Ethan. He was standing there, his eyes full of suspicion, his hair a mess, his voice hoarse. "What are you doing in my room, Mom?" I jumped, hiding the phone behind my back, my heart pounding. "Oh, I was just looking for the old photo album," I replied awkwardly, forcing a smile. Ethan sighed, didn't ask any more questions, and walked unsteadily to the kitchen, where I knew he would look for a bottle of liquor again. Looking at my son's back, I felt my heart clench. I wanted to tell him everything, to show him those documents, but I knew Ethan wasn't ready to face the truth yet. In the afternoon, I met Davies at the small diner where we had met before. He had new information. When I sat down, he pushed another stack of photos toward me, this time taken in the empty hospital parking lot. The images showed Clara and Dr. Evans inside a car, sharing intimate gestures that were impossible to deny. Clara, dressed in patient clothes, was smiling at Evans, her hand on his, her gaze full of intention. I sat motionless, stirring my now cold coffee with a trembling hand. "Is this real, Davies?" I whispered, my voice breaking. He nodded, his voice grave. "I followed them for several nights. This isn't the first time. There's something very shady going on here, Mrs. Miller. You need to prepare yourself." I looked at the photos, feeling the whole world collapsing beneath my feet. Clara wasn't just faking a coma. She was also having a secret affair with Dr. Evans. This play didn't have one actor, but two, and they were playing their parts perfectly to deceive my entire family. That midday, the heat in Chicago was suffocating, and the air inside my small bakery felt so thick I could hardly breathe. I had just wiped down the counter, sweat beading on my forehead, trying to focus on organizing the place to forget the doubts that were eating away at me. In those days, every minute felt like a battle maintaining the bakery, caring for Leo, and facing the terrifying truth about Clara. I had just arranged the remaining loaves in a basket, ready to close up and rest, when thunderous knocks echoed on the back alley door. The noise was so loud that I jumped and almost dropped the tray from my hands. I ran to open it, a bad feeling in my chest. When the door opened, I froze. 3 men blocked the entrance, with hard faces and tattoos of snakes and dragons running down their arms. The one who seemed to be the boss, tall and with a shaved head, held out a crumpled piece of paper and spoke in a rough voice. "Where's Clara? It's time to pay the debt." I looked at the paper, my heart pounding wildly, as if the blood was draining from my body. I tried to stay calm, though my hands were already shaking. "You're mistaken. My daughter-in-law is in a coma at the hospital. She can't see anyone." The man let out a dry laugh, a sound so cruel it sent a shiver down my spine. "A coma? You think we're idiots? Clara asked us for a huge sum to invest in a business. If she plays dumb, this family won't have any peace." His words cut through me like a knife. I looked around and saw some neighbors peeking from their doors, their faces a mix of curiosity and fear. I knew that if this escalated, the whole neighborhood would talk, and my family would be the target of gossip. I swallowed hard and replied in a controlled voice. "Please, calm down. I don't know anything about these debts. Let me find out." But the boss wasn't willing to back down. He smirked and pointed at my small house. "Find out? You have 1 week. If there's no money, sell the house and pay." I felt the floor open up beneath my feet. I wanted to protest, to scream that I had nothing to do with it, that Clara was still in the hospital, but the cold stares of the 3 men made it clear they weren't playing. I hurried inside. I opened the safe hidden in the kitchen and took out all the savings I had put away for years for Leo and the bakery. I put it in the boss's hand, my voice trembling. "Take this for now. I beg you to give me more time." They looked at me with contempt, as if deciding whether to ruin everything right there. In the end, the boss pocketed the money and issued one last threat. 1 week. Don't make us come back. Then the 3 of them left. Their heavy footsteps faded down the alley. I collapsed onto the step, drenched in sweat, not from the heat, but from the fear and helplessness that were strangling me. Clara in debt? Investing in businesses? Those words echoed in my head, but they made no sense. Her, whom I always thought was so simple, how could she be involved in something like this? Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Davies. I opened it with my hands still shaking, and I felt my heart stop when I saw what he had sent. They were pictures of Clara and Dr. Evans inside a car parked at the hospital. They were embracing shamelessly, and Clara's eyes looked at him with a tenderness that seemed to erase the entire world. Along with the photos was a short audio clip with a note from Davies. I recorded their conversation inside the car with a special device. "You should listen." I played the recording. My hand was shaking so much, I almost dropped the phone. Clara's voice came through, sharp but clear enough for me to hear every word. "Let me sleep for a few more weeks, and then we'll move on to the final step. That insurance money will solve all the debts and give us a new life." Evans's voice replied, deep and calculating. "Relax, Clara. Everything is on track. As long as no one suspects anything, we'll succeed." I turned off the recording, feeling all the strength drain from my body. Everything exploded in my head. Clara wasn't just faking a coma. She wasn't just having an affair with Dr. Evans, but she had staged a whole charade to escape her debts and collect the insurance money. She planned to leave everything behind, Ethan, Leo, and me, to start a new life with her accomplice. That afternoon, I sat in front of a cup of cold coffee, clenching my hands as if I could still hold on to a bit of courage. I knew that if I wanted to protect my family, I couldn't stay silent any longer. Ethan, my son, had to know the truth, even if it destroyed him. I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked to the living room where Ethan was sitting, his gaze lost in the void. I laid all the evidence on the table, the photos of Clara and Evans in the car, the copy of the insurance contract, and the phone with the recording. Ethan looked up, his eyes clouded, not understanding what I was doing. "Mom, what is this?" he asked in a hoarse voice, still smelling of last night's alcohol. I sat down across from him, trying to stay strong, though my heart was pounding. "Ethan, I need you to look at this. I know you don't want to believe it, but you have to face the truth." I pointed to the pile of photos, my voice breaking. "Clara is not in a coma. She's deceiving us." Ethan shook his head over and over, his trembling hands brushing against the photos, until he suddenly swept them to the floor and shouted, "This can't be! Where did you get this? It's all fake! Clara would never betray me." His red eyes seemed to desperately cling to a faith that was crumbling. I took his trembling hand, speaking as gently as I could. "Ethan, you have to wake up. Look at reality. Clara not only deceived you, she manipulated Leo's innocence. I know it hurts, but you can't keep living in a lie. Play the recording." Clara's voice sounded again, clear and cold. "Let me sleep for a few more weeks, and then we'll move on to the final step. That insurance money will solve all the debts and give us a new life." Ethan stood frozen, as if someone had slapped him. He listened to the entire audio and then suddenly broke down, tears of pain and devastation streaming from his eyes. "Why, Mom? Why would she do this to me? Why to Leo?" he whispered, his voice broken. I held him, feeling his body tremble in my arms, not knowing how to comfort him. I could only say, "I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm hurting too, but we have to be strong for Leo." Ethan stood up, staggering, went to the liquor cabinet, filled a glass with whiskey, and drank it in one gulp. Then he went into his room and slammed the door. That slam echoed like a hammer blow to my chest. I knew my son needed time, but I also knew that I couldn't wait any longer. The truth was out, and if Clara and Evans were about to take the final step in their plan, I had to act before it was too late. I arranged to meet Davies the next morning in a secluded corner of our usual diner. He was there, with a cup of black coffee in front of him, his face tense. "Have you told Ethan?" he asked as soon as I sat down. I nodded, my voice heavy. "He doesn't want to believe it, but a mother can't let her son continue to be deceived. What do we do now, Davies?" He tapped the table gently with his fingers, his gaze sharp. "We have enough evidence to go to the police, the recording, the photos, the insurance contract, but if you want Ethan to see the truth with his own eyes, we need a final blow at the hospital. We have to make Clara and Evans expose themselves." I nodded, feeling both determination and fear. I knew Ethan needed to see it for himself. Otherwise, he would always live in the illusion of the wife he once loved. The next day, I sought out Captain Bryant, an old schoolmate who was now the local police chief. We had been friends in our youth, and I knew she was someone I could trust. In her small office, I told her everything, from Leo's video to Davies's evidence. Bryant listened, her face growing more serious. When I showed her the recording, she shook her head, her voice grave. "This is organized fraud, Mrs. Miller. If what you're saying is true, Clara and Evans have not only violated ethics, but the law." She paused and looked at me intently. "I will help you, but we need a valid pretext to barge in without raising suspicion. Do you have a plan yet?" I didn't get a chance to answer when my phone vibrated in my purse. It was Dr. Evans's number. I answered, my heart racing. His voice on the other end was heavy, with a false tone of compassion. "Mrs. Miller, I'm very sorry to inform you that Clara's situation is worsening. Perhaps the family should prepare themselves. Tomorrow morning, please have everyone present. We will give the final prognosis." A chill ran through me, as if I had touched a block of ice. There it was. This was the moment they planned to bring the curtain down on their charade. I tried to sound calm as I replied, "Yes, doctor, we'll be there tomorrow." After hanging up, I turned to Bryant, my voice trembling. "Tomorrow, in Clara's room." "That's the moment." Bryant nodded with a firm look. "All right, I'll get the team ready. We will act at the right instant." I felt a spark of hope, but at the same time, the fear grew. What would happen when Ethan faced the truth? Would he be able to handle the blow? And Leo, my dear grandson, how would he react knowing his mother had deceived the entire family? That evening, I took Leo to Mrs. Peterson's house, the trusted neighbor who lived across the street. I didn't want the boy to witness the terrible scene that was about to unfold. When I told him he would be sleeping at Mrs. Peterson's that night, Leo looked at me with worry in his eyes. "Grandma, is my mom okay? Will you take me to see her tomorrow?" I hugged him, holding back tears. "She's okay, sweetie. I'll pick you up early tomorrow." But as the boy turned away, I felt my heart break. How could I protect him from such a cruel truth? When I returned home, I found Ethan sitting in the dark with a liquor bottle rolling at his feet. He said nothing, just sat there, his eyes red and empty. I approached him, placed my hand on his shoulder, and said just one sentence. "You have to go to the hospital tomorrow. You need to know the final truth." Ethan looked up, his face scarred with pain, but he nodded in silence. I knew he also felt that everything was about to change forever. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was as heavy as lead. I woke up early, not from the habit of baking bread, but from the sense of unease that squeezed my chest. Today was the day everything would come to light. And even though I had prepared myself, my heart was still trembling. Ethan was sitting at the table, not saying a word, his face gaunt and exhausted after so many days lost between alcohol and pain. I looked at my son. I wanted to say something to comfort him, but my throat closed up. "Let's go, Ethan." It was the only thing I could say in a hoarse voice. He nodded, stood up, and together we got in the car, driving in silence toward St. Jude's Medical Center. During the entire ride, Ethan stared out the window with a lost gaze, as if his soul had left his body long ago. When we arrived at the hospital, the familiar hallway appeared with its strong smell of disinfectant and the constant noise of machines. Sarah was there with a few other nurses, her face nervous and restless, as if she knew something was about to happen. I glanced at her but said nothing, just squeezed Ethan's hand to give him strength. Dr. Evans came out of his office with a file in his hand. He greeted us with a feigned formality and said in a grave, solemn voice, "Mrs. Miller, Mr. Miller, please come in." I nodded, though rage was boiling inside me. I knew that right outside, Captain Bryant and her team of police officers were already in position. We entered Clara's room, where some relatives had already gathered. The air was thick, as if everyone could feel the tension. Clara lay motionless in the bed, her face pale, but I no longer saw her as a victim. I only saw a woman who had staged a cruel play, deceiving my entire family. Evans, standing by the bed, began his speech in a pitiful tone. "After many days of effort, we regret to inform you that the patient's condition is worsening. We fear she may not survive. The family should be prepared." Ethan lowered his head. His shoulders were trembling. Some family members began to sob, and the moans spread, creating a scene of mourning as fake as it was calculated. I remained standing, my fists clenched, holding back the fury that burned in my chest. I looked at Evans, at his perfect performance, and I knew it was a matter of seconds before his theater came to an end. But what they didn't imagine was that today, Captain Bryant and I would be the ones to bring down the curtain. Just as Evans lifted his pen to sign the fatal prognosis certificate, the door burst open. 3 uniformed police officers entered, led by Bryant, whose gaze was cold and determined. The room fell into absolute silence. Bryant declared firmly, "Dr. Evans, Mrs. Clara Miller, you are under arrest for fraud and insurance scamming." Her voice rang out, loud and relentless, like a hammer blow shattering the entire charade. And then, something incredible happened. Clara, the one supposedly in a deep coma, suddenly opened her eyes, sat up in bed, and screamed, "What are you talking about? You have no proof. This is slander." Her shrill, desperate voice had nothing in common with someone who had been motionless for weeks. Ethan was frozen, his mouth agape, staring at his dying wife screaming like a wild animal. Clara turned to him, and a flash of panic appeared in her eyes, as if she realized she had just given herself away. She quickly turned her face away, unable to meet her husband's gaze. Bryant gave a signal, and an officer stepped forward, presenting all the evidence. The photos of Clara and Evans in the car, the recording of their conversation, the images of the insurance contract, and the statement from the nurse, Sarah. I took out my cell phone and showed the video Leo had recorded, where Clara could be seen secretly opening her eyes, drinking water, and getting up when no one was watching. Murmurs and comments began to fill the room. A relative muttered, "My God, how is this possible?" Another exclaimed, "She deceived our entire family." The atmosphere in the room turned chaotic, as if the truth had just shattered all illusions. Ethan was trembling, his eyes fixed on Clara. Then, as if waking from a dream, he shouted with a broken voice, "Clara, why did you do this to me? Why to Leo?" Clara lunged at him, trying to hug him, crying and pleading, "Ethan, you have to understand, I had no choice. I owed so much money. I just wanted a better life for us." But Ethan pushed her hands away, his eyes now reflecting only rage and repulsion. "Better? You abandoned our son. You abandoned this family just for money." His voice trembled, as if each word was a dagger stabbing into his own chest. Evans stood there, his head bowed, unable to offer any more excuses, as the recording from the car played. His voice echoed, cold and calculating, "Relax, Clara. As long as no one suspects anything, we'll succeed." The entire room fell silent. Only the sound of the hospital's paging system could be heard in the distance. Bryant gave a signal, and the officers placed the cold silver handcuffs on both their wrists. Clara was still struggling, screaming desperately, "I did it all because of the debts. I had no way out." But no one believed her anymore. Not even the relatives who had been crying for her moments before now just looked at her with strange eyes. Ethan collapsed into a chair, his hands in his head, as if he couldn't bear the weight of the truth. I approached him, placed my hand on my son's shoulder, and said softly, "This is the truth, son. I know it hurts, but we have to move on." Ethan didn't answer. He just sat there, silent tears falling. I felt his pain as if it were my own. I had lost a daughter-in-law whom I had loved, but Ethan had lost a part of his life. The once quiet hospital room was now chaos. Clara's screams grew fainter and more distant as she was led away in handcuffs. Evans walked behind, his head low, with no trace of the authority of a hospital director. When the door closed, bringing back the silence, I looked around the room at the stunned faces of the family members and felt a great emptiness in my heart. The truth had come to light, but it brought no joy, only pain and emptiness. A few months have passed since that day the truth erupted in the hospital room, but every moment remains etched in my memory. The image of Clara sitting up and screaming frantically, the pain-filled eyes of Ethan, and the sound of handcuffs closing on their wrists, it all felt like an unforgettable nightmare. But now, standing before the court, I feel a slight relief, as if a weight is finally being lifted from my heart. Today is the day of the public trial for Clara and Dr. Evans, and I know it will be the final point of the cruel play that destroyed my family. Ethan and I sat in the front row of the packed courtroom. The atmosphere was suffocating, filled with the murmurs of strangers, the press, and some neighbors. Ethan was beside me, much thinner than before, but he no longer had the desperation that the bottles gave him. There was a calm in his eyes, as if he had learned to live with the pain. I took his hand, squeezing it tightly to give him support. He looked at me, smiled faintly, and I understood that although it still hurt, he was trying to move on. The judge, a middle-aged man with a stern face, began to read the indictment. His voice echoed clearly, each word like a hammer blow shattering the falsehood of the past few months. Clara and Evans were charged with multiple crimes: fraud, insurance scamming, and conspiracy to embezzle assets. All the evidence was displayed publicly on the large screen in the courtroom. Leo's video, Davy's photos, the recording in the car, and the insurance contracts I found in the drawer. Each piece of evidence was a part of the puzzle that exposed the elaborate plan by Clara and Evans to deceive my entire family. Evans sat in the defendant's dock, his head bowed, not daring to look up. He admitted his guilt in a low voice, almost a whisper, acknowledging that he had helped Clara out of greed and because of their sordid relationship. Clara, on the other hand, still tried to resist. She cried, her hair tangled, her reddened eyes looking toward Ethan. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I didn't want it to be this way. I just wanted to pay off the debts. I wanted a better life for us." But those belated tears no longer moved anyone. Ethan looked at her coldly, without a drop of compassion. "Better? You betrayed this family. You betrayed Leo, just for money," he said, his voice trembling with rage and pain. The final sentence was delivered. Evans received 6 years in prison, Clara 5 years, in addition to the obligation to pay back all damages. When the judge struck the gavel, the sharp sound marked the end of everything. Clara collapsed, crying inconsolably. But no one in the courtroom would look at her. Evans was escorted away, his head low, the figure of someone who once had power and was now nothing more than a shadow. Ethan was beside me, his hands clenched, silent tears falling. I knew they weren't tears of suffering, but of release. My son was finally free from the illusion of a wife he once loved. When we left the courthouse, the radiant Chicago sun no longer burned as it used to. The press surrounded us, microphones in our faces, questions thrown relentlessly. I said only one sentence, my voice calm but firm. "Justice has been served. Never play with a family's feelings, because the price will be too high." Ethan was beside me, not saying a word, but squeezing my hand tightly, as if to tell me he was ready to move on. Our life slowly returned to its course, though the scars remained. My little bakery once again filled with customers. The smell of flour and yeast brought back that feeling of home. Every morning I would wake up early, knead the dough, bake the first batches of bread, and feel my heart grow lighter. Leo started to chat again, helping me arrange the bread, running around the shop with his pure smile. He still mentioned his mother, but no longer with that lost sadness from before. His laughter, like sunlight, was filling the painful gaps in our small home. Ethan changed too. He got a new job at a mechanic shop where he could focus on concrete things instead of getting lost in alcohol. I watched him learn to be a true father, spending time playing with Leo, taking him to school, and telling him stories every night. Some nights, I would see Ethan sitting silently by the window, his gaze lost, but I knew he was learning to forgive not Clara, but himself. One afternoon, when the whole family was gathered around the table, Leo suddenly looked up, his eyes wide, and looked at me. "Grandma, is Mom ever coming back?" The boy's question was like a stab, but I smiled, took his small hand, and answered tenderly. "Some people choose to leave, Leo, but the important thing is that we still have each other. Grandma, your dad, and you that's family." Ethan looked at me, his eyes shining with determination, and then he stroked Leo's head. "That's right, son. We'll always be here for each other." Miguel nodded, an innocent smile gracing his face, and for the first time in many months, I felt this house was warm again, like before. I stood there, looking at my son and my grandson, my heart filled with peace. The worst storm had passed, leaving scars, but also giving us the strength to move forward. I thought about the days of suffering, the sleepless nights, and all those times I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, but now I know my family made it. We didn't just survive, we became stronger, more united. I got up, poured another glass of orange juice for Leo, and smiled as I listened to him talk about a new drawing he had made in class. A drawing of his grandma, his dad, and him, together under a bright Sunday. Seeing Leo's smile and Ethan's steady gaze, I knew that no matter how painful the past had been, we would continue on together. My little house, once shattered by the storm, was now rebuilt not with bricks, but with love and trust. And I, who had dedicated my entire life to protecting this family, finally found a little peace in my heart. The story you have just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We don't tell it to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face it all to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the way for others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the final screen, I will leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I am convinced they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.